All right, so I'm going to share my screen and we're going to go to chapter 1b. So this will be the second lecture for chapter 1. We're going to go share from the beginning. I think we're all set. So this is chapter 1 continued. You'll see it listed as chapter 1b video in Canvas. We're going to continue with the discussion on something called homeostasis. Let me see if I can get this out of the way. There we go. I don't know how I did that, but it worked. So homeostasis is something that when we were talking about the organ systems, like how the respiratory system works with the cardiovascular system, or your integumentary system works to control body temperature. Homeostasis is a goal that organ systems perform their function to maintain homeostasis. It's the presence of a stable environment within the body. Failure to maintain this can lead to disease, like heat stroke in the summer. If you get too hot and your body's not able to keep you cool enough, you can basically go into a heat stroke or hypothermia. Think about extremely cold temperatures. Those extremely cold temperatures, your body can regulate body temperature within a certain range. That range is considered a homeostatic range, where your body is maintaining a relatively stable internal environment. It can fluctuate just a little bit one way or another, but for the most part, your body uses organ systems to maintain a body temperature within a normal range. Outside of that normal range, you can become harmed or become diseased, or you can even die. Homeostatic regulation is basically how your body, your organ systems adjust to preserve homeostasis. This body temperature, I will use this example a lot as we move forward. Think about the temperature in your home. What controls the temperature in your home? Thermostat, right? What's your thermostat set at right now? Mine is set at 78 degrees. Is that too warm or too cold for you? That 78 degrees is perfect for me in my home and my 2 dogs. That environment, though, if it gets too warm, like say that thermostat goes from 78 and it now reads 79 or 80 degrees, what will happen in my home or in your home if the temperature changes away from the set point that you set on your thermostat? Your air conditioner kicks on, right? So if it gets too hot in here, like 80 degrees instead of 78, my air conditioner will kick on. You might even hear it happen as I'm sitting here lecturing. So as that air conditioner kicks on and turns on and starts blowing out cold air, it cools my home back down to the temperature that I set it, 78 degrees. Or if it gets too cold, as that air blows down to 77 degrees maybe, what will happen? The thermostat turns off, and so does the cool air that's blowing out of my vents. So that's basically what happens in your body to control body temperature. A receptor or a sensor, like a thermometer or a thermostat, detects changes in the environment, and that change is the stimulus for the next couple of steps to occur. That stimulus, a change in temperature away from the set point, initiates this response to occur. So the receptor, like a thermometer, you have a receptor in your skin or in your body that senses changes in temperature. That receptor sends a signal to a control center. The control center in your body is usually the nervous system, like the brain or the spinal cord. That control center has a thermostat, a set temperature that you're able to survive at healthfully. That receives and processes the information. Remember I said in the nervous system, when we talked about the goal of this nervous system is to integrate or process information that's supplied by that receptor, and then that sends out a signal to an effector, the air conditioner in our home. We'll talk about what the effector is in our body, that responds to the command from the control center and opposes the original stimulus. So basically, it's a call-in response or a stimulus response mechanism. That mechanism is called a negative feedback mechanism. And in a negative feedback mechanism, when a stimulus occurs, like a change in body temperature, the response is to oppose that stimulus, bring body temperature back up or back down if it was too cold or too hot. The stimulation of a receptor triggers the response to that change in the environment at that receptor. So it causes a feedback. So when the feedback occurs, it's a negative feedback. Think something that's negative opposes an original stimulus. It triggers this response to correct a situation. And the corrected situation is if body temperature goes up, body temperature will come back down. It will be corrected back to its quote unquote set point. So you can see the temperature range here. This blue line or this blue box, rectangular box, designates a normal range in body temperature that your body can live at and be healthy. Outside of that range, you get too hot or too cold. So up here would be like heading towards heat stroke. Down here would be heading towards like hypothermia. So your body, though, can cycle to colder, a little bit warmer, colder, a little bit warmer. It can cycle through changes in body temperature, but still maintain a healthy set point. And that set point is, say, 22 degrees Celsius or 98 degrees Fahrenheit, right? Something around that temperature. A little bit higher and a little bit lower is perfectly healthy, but anything beyond that, not healthy. So it's your body's job to keep your body temperature within that range. If you get too hot, what's your body's response? What do? Typically you sweat. Or if you get too cold, you shiver. The sweating and the shivering are responses to the original stimulus, a change in body temperature, to bring your body temperature back into a normal, back closer to the set point. So you've got this thermostat up in your brain, the control center, that if body temperature increases, the receptors in your body will respond. Send a signal to the control center to say, it's too warm, we need to cool off. That sends commands to an effector tissue, we'll talk about on the next slide, that helps cool you back off and maintain some normal temperature. In your body, here's the response that occurs. So to maintain homeostasis, there's a disturbance. There are receptors that respond to changes in temperature in your skin and in your brain. Those receptors are there to monitor changes in body temperature. And as body temperature changes, those receptors send a signal to the control center in your brain. That control center is that purple spot right here, deep within your brain. That temperature control center receives a signal from the receptor and says, okay, it's too hot or it's too cold. Now what do? That temperature control center sends yet another signal to the effector tissue, like smooth muscle in the walls of blood vessels or sweat glands in your skin. And if you're too warm, that control center sends a signal to the sweat glands in your skin to tell them to start sweating so that you can cool your body back off and bring body temperature back down closer to the set point. So that maintains this whole negative feedback loop. This figure here is showing you an example of a negative feedback loop, so that if body temperature increases, body temperature will come back down. So it's all one big negative feedback loop around a normal set range or set point to maintain homeostasis. And maintaining homeostasis isn't a static environment, it's an ever-changing environment, but it only changes within a certain window because your body's able to control that window. The primary mechanism, basically, of homeostatic regulation is negative feedback. And negative feedback loops or mechanisms minimize change. So change is okay, change is good. Increase in body temperature or a decrease in body temperature, but only within a certain range. And these negative feedback mechanisms control long-term control over the body's internal conditions. And it's a dynamic process. Again, your body's ever changing, but there's set points and ranges in which your body is able to work in a healthy manner. A positive feedback mechanism is not an example of homeostasis. And that basically when positive feedback occurs is when a response is exaggerated or enhanced from the original stimulus. So now the stimulus occurs, and as opposed to the response opposing the stimulus, the response exaggerates the stimulus in a positive feedback mechanism. For example, blood clotting. Positive feedback loops do not maintain homeostasis, so they're not normally occurring in the body. But your body can use a positive feedback loop to exaggerate a response that could otherwise harm you or cause problems. Blood clotting is an example. There's an immediate cut. So there's a cut here in this person's arm, which damages a blood vessel. And if you damage a blood vessel, you can lose blood from that blood vessel and eventually die. To prevent that, there's chemicals that get released from the damaged blood vessel that signal to other cells in your body to come to the rescue of this damaged blood cell, like cells called platelets. Platelets get sticky and they stick together and plug off the damaged blood vessel. Well, when that happens, those platelets release even more chemicals that recruit even more cells and more molecules to the site of damage. And this positive feedback loop just basically accelerates, and chemicals and more chemicals and more chemicals get released from the cells that are helping repair the blood vessel. And it causes this exaggerated response to form a really large blood clot that prevents further blood loss from the damaged blood vessel. But after that process is complete and the blood vessel is repaired, the positive feedback loop stops. Another example of a positive feedback loop would be the birth of a child. When the baby pushes on the cervix in mom, the baby, that stretching of the cervix sends a signal to the brain to release a hormone. That hormone causes contractions in the uterus to help push baby out. Well, as that happens, baby pushes even more on the cervix, signals even more to the brain to release more hormones that produce a stronger and stronger and stronger uterine contraction. Well, that process stops eventually when baby's born. But until that happens, it continues to exaggerate and exaggerate and exaggerate, and uterine contractions get larger and harder and heavier until baby is born. So positive feedback loops don't normally happen on a day-to-day basis, but they are utilized at certain times to protect the body or to undergo a process that's necessary, like childbirth. But once that process is complete, the positive feedback loop stops. Negative feedback loops, in opposition of that, are always working to maintain homeostasis. Moving on from that, we're going to finish this chapter by discussing anatomical position and some background information related to anatomy that you need to learn and understand so that the rest of the semester we can communicate. Because anatomy and physiology has its own unique language. And we use this language in reference to what's called anatomic position. So I want you to pause the video when I'm done talking here for a second and put yourself into anatomical position. That's a position where the body stands with your hands at your side, just like this person here, palms facing forward, feet facing forward, eyes facing forward. This is an anatomic position. We use anatomical position in anatomy and physiology as a point of reference. If I refer to the anterior proximal portion of the right femur, 10 centimeters distal to the inguinal region, it's a really fancy terminology for the front of the leg, closest to where it attaches to the body, but just south of this region here is the inguinal region. I'm always referring to those terms in anatomical position. So look at this figure here. If this person turns his hand, so the back of his hand is facing you, he's now out of anatomic position. And if I say anterior or posterior side of his hand, how do we know which one's which? If I'm referring to him in anatomical position, I always know what's anterior. I always know what's posterior. I can use directional terminology or body landmarks that we'll talk about in the next couple of slides, referring to anatomic position, and I can talk to you over my computer or the internet, or I can speak to somebody in Australia if I wanted to, and I can always refer to and use anatomic terminology, knowing that I'm referring to anatomic position. So stop the video, put yourself in anatomic position, and get comfortable with that. Every single thing that we talk about from this point forward, if I refer to anything in the human body, a directional term or a specific site, I will refer to it in anatomic position. And supine and prone are lying face up, supine, or face down, prone, and in anatomical position. So this is the first time we'll introduce a directional term or with regard to anatomic position. Because of that, anatomy uses a special language. So not really a special language. It's mostly just based on Latin or Greek origin, and the vocabulary continually expands. It's complicated, and a lot of anatomic terms were named based on somebody who discovered them or the victim of a disease. A lot of those terms have been replaced over time with more precise terms. Those precise terms are typically of Latin or Greek origin. So knowing root words and derivatives of them can help you understand those terms. And what I mean by that is this table here. So in this table, yes, there's a lot on it, but let's break it down. And I will continually throughout the semester break words down, anatomic and physiological words, break them down into their components to make sure that you understand what we're talking about. And hopefully over time and with reference to this table throughout the semester, we can catch on to what all these terms mean, because the terminology and the wordage in anatomy and physiology is complicated. But if you break apart these words into their components, it gets a lot more manageable. So for example, cardio here means heart. So the root word here, cardio, means heart. So think cardiac or cardiopulmonary. Cardiac always refers to the heart. Another term like myo here. Myo means muscle. Another term, site, means cell or a hollow cell. So cytology is the study of cells. If you put those three root terms or words together, cardio, myo, site, those three terms together are a heart muscle cell. Cardio, heart, myo, muscle, site, cell. A cardiomyocyte is the major cell type of the heart, right? So cardiomyocytes collectively make up cardiac muscle tissue. Other terms, so I'm not going to go through all of these terms, but you should know and understand these terms. I'm not going to test you on what these root words or prefixes or suffixes mean specifically, but I will use these terms like cardiomyocytes or epidermis. Epidermis is, so over here is epi, means on or on top of. Derm means skin. So the epidermis is the outer layer of the skin. Like you can actually see and look at yourself right now, look at your arm. That outer layer of skin is called the epidermis. I'll break these words down as we go, but you should be familiar with this table. Maybe make some flashcards. Or if you have the flashcard, there's an anatomy and physiology flashcard book that is in the library at Collin to be checked out. Or there's a pretty cheap version of it on Amazon if you Google it or if you look it up. But those flashcards can be really helpful in remembering root words like this, and knowing and learning and understanding these root words or prefixes and suffixes can really help you along the way in anatomy and physiology understand what we're talking about. And I would say have this table really nearby as you're studying throughout the entire semester, so that as really long words pop up, you can break them down into their components and understand them a little bit better. Other terminology is called regional terminology or body landmark terminology. These body landmarks I will also use. Like I would use the word gluteal. The gluteal region of your body. Think about your gluteus maximus. Where is that muscle located? The gluteal region is here. Or I have two highlighted regions called the brachial region. That's your upper arm. There's muscles there like the biceps brachii or the triceps brachii. Those are two muscles in the brachial region of your body. So I will test you on quizzes and on exams about these landmarks. So you should be familiar with all of them. The popliteal region or area is the back of the knee. I will use these terms to have you answer questions like, if I put a wound on this person and asked you the location of that wound, you'd have to answer questions about that related to where that wound is located. And we can use body landmarks and regional anatomy like this on this figure to describe to someone in the healthcare field where an injury is located or where someone is experiencing pain. So we would say, left lateral inguinal region. So the inguinal region is right here. So if I said inguinal region to somebody who is a physician or a nurse or a physical therapist, they would immediately know to look for pain or know that pain is located in one of these two regions. And then I could get more specific from there to say right or left side, medial or lateral. We'll talk about directional terminology next, anterior versus posterior. So we're going to get more and more specific as we go into the next couple of slides, but you should memorize and learn and know these terms, this regional anatomy, so that as we move forward, we'll discuss this regional. I'll use the terms of this regional anatomy and not say, the front of your arm or your upper arm or your lower arm. I'll actually say the brachial region or the antebrachial region or umbilical region. I'll use this anatomic terminology as we move forward. So not only would the previous table be helpful to have near you at all times, but so would this figure, as well as the next couple. This terminology is useful when it comes to body planes. So sometimes the only way to show a relationship between body parts in a three-dimensional body is by using sectional planes or sectional views. Now this figure is different than the figure that you'll see in your textbook. I like this figure a little bit better. I Googled it and found this figure. It just really nicely does a good job of showing and illustrating the planes a little bit better than the one in your book. So these planes are described on the next slide. So I'm going to flip back and forth between this slide and the next slide to describe these planes. For example, the sagittal plane is also called the median plane. So there's two sagittal planes on this figure, one in blue and one in red. The difference is that the median plane here, that's designated there, there's another set of planes, so two slides later, is also called the mid-sagittal plane. The mid-sagittal plane here, and a sagittal plane in general, slices or separates the body into a right and left side. The mid-sagittal section or median section divides the body into an exact right and left side. So you're split 50-50 right down the middle. You have exactly as much space and tissue on the right side as you do on the left. That's mid-sagittal. Any other sagittal cut will still slice you or separate you into a right and a left side, but it's not an exact right and left side. So mid-sagittal or median plane is the only plane in the body that would slice you into an exact right and left half. Parasagittal is parallel to that mid-sagittal plane, but to the right or to the left. So it cuts you into an unequal right and left side. I'm going to flip back. The frontal plane, this purple here, and on the next slide, this plane here slices you into an anterior and a posterior. So again, on this table, right here's the frontal plane, basically separates the body into an anterior front and a posterior back portion. And lastly, the transverse plane cuts you into a top and a bottom, a superior and an inferior portion. So these body planes, I'm going to flip back again, so there's a couple of slides I'm flipping around, can be used by medical imaging techniques like MRIs or CT scans. And those scans can be utilized to locate a specific section of a specific organ or tissue in the body to maybe find a tumor or a damaged ligament or tendon. Those things, those imaging techniques utilize body planes and sectional views to locate specific areas in the body. Okay, back down to past that. The directional terms, those body planes I mentioned, like the frontal plane sections you into an anterior and a posterior, or the transverse plane separates you to a superior and inferior section. Those directional terms I will use throughout the rest of the semester. Some of them can be used interchangeably, like anterior is interchanged with ventral, or posterior is interchanged with dorsal. So if I say posterior or dorsal, those mean the same thing. Or anterior or ventral, those also mean the same thing. Think about the dorsal fin on a dolphin or a shark. Where is that located? On its back, right? So dorsal means posterior. And that just means front versus back, anterior versus posterior. Cranial versus caudal and superior and inferior are oftentimes used interchangeably, but cranial and caudal are utilized typically in four-legged animals like a dog, meaning head, cranial, tail, caudal. In a two-legged human, superior and inferior is what we'll use. So superior means closer to the head, inferior means closer to the feet, farther away from the head, yes? And I will ask you questions like, your neck is what to your belly button? Superior. Or your belly button is what to your shoulder? Inferior. So those types of questions you should expect on quizzes and exams. Other directional terms like proximal and distal refer to the point of attachment of the limb. So we will only use proximal and distal with regard to the arm and the leg. The arm and the leg attach the arm here at the trunk and the leg here at the trunk. So this point of attachment is most proximal, closest to the point of attachment to the rest of the body. Distal is farther away. So think distance is far off or far away. So if a structure is distal, it's farther away from this point of attachment. So your fingers are distal to your elbow. As the elbow is closer to point of attachment, those fingers are farther away, so they are distal. But your elbow is proximal to your fingers. So I would ask questions like, your knee is what to your toes? Proximal. Or your toes are what to your hip? Distal. Make sense? The last two are medial and lateral. Think medial is middle, closer to the midline. Lateral is farther away, more a distance away from the midline. So if the midline of your body is right down through here, this imaginary line that cuts you into basically a mid-sagittal cut would be most medial. Anything left or right of that would be lateral. So your belly button is most medial, or your nose is medial to your ears, or your ears are lateral to your nose. There's a table that describes that. So this is another table that'd be great to have with you as we go. Study that and learn it. The abdominal pelvic quadrants, quad is 4, yes. These abdominal pelvic quadrants, there are 4 of them. And they are formed by a pair of imaginary perpendicular lines, these blue lines here. There's 1 and there's 2. What divides these quadrants, or what basically the abdominal pelvic quadrants are formed from, are these imaginary lines, excuse me, that separates the abdominal pelvic cavity, which is this cavity here. We'll talk about what these cavities are next. To the right upper quadrant, left upper quadrant, whoops, my cursor just flipped me forward, the right lower quadrant, and the left lower quadrant. So these quadrants are used by clinicians to describe the location of pains or an injury. So if someone walks into a hospital and says, my stomach hurts, what would be the first thing that you would ask them? where does it hurt, right? So if they say, oh, it hurts right here, we could say to a clinician or prescribe something or write notes and say pain in the right lower quadrant. And that would say to the next person looking at those notes, okay, I know where that pain is located. The 9 abdominal pelvic regions are simply more precise than the abdominal pelvic quadrants. So if somebody says, my stomach hurts, you say, where? And they say, oh, right here. You can say one of two things. If I flip back, how about left upper quadrant? Or maybe if you can be more precise, you could say the left hypochondriac region. So this big word, hypochondriac. Hypo means under. Chondro basically refers to cartilage or ribs. And your ribs are located right here. So under the ribs, hypochondriac, that's the left hypochondriac region. So maybe we can isolate an organ in that area that may be the cause of the problem. So these are more precise in the abdominal pelvic quadrants. You should be able to label them and also identify organs in each one of those regions or quadrants. So here's an example. Here's the abdominal pelvic quadrants designated by the blue lines. And then the red lines designate the abdominal pelvic regions. There are 9. So you should be able to identify each one of these regions and label or name, identify organs, major organs in each one of those. And yes, there are some organs like the small intestine would be right here that you can find in more than one region or more than one quadrant. So you should be able to list or describe the organs in those areas. And these body cavities, one of the last things that we will talk about is body cavities. And your body is subdivided into regions called body cavities. Think about what a cavity would be. Not the cavity in your tooth, but like a space, a cavity. These cavities serve 2 functions: to protect the organs in that cavity from shock or impact, and also allow those organs to change size and shape. Like think about the heart. The heart resides in a cavity, but it needs to move around. So it can't be restricted. It has to be able to move. These internal organs are either partially or completely enclosed in their cavity. This example is the heart. Anything that's enclosed, called viscera. Viscera means internal organ. For example, the heart is a visceral organ, and it's encased in the pericardial cavity. This white space right here is the pericardial cavity, and that space is created by linings or membranes. Those membranes attach the heart to the body cavity in which it resides in the chest and protect the heart so that as it moves around, it doesn't get damaged. Wrong direction. There we go. There is a ventral and a dorsal body cavity that are then subdivided even further. The ventral body cavity is subdivided into the thoracic cavity here that is above the diaphragm, superior to the diaphragm or above it. That diaphragm is that major muscle of breathing that I mentioned in the last lecture. And the abdominal pelvic cavities. The abdominal pelvic cavity is another major cavity inferior to the diaphragm, where you can find like digestive system organs, urinary reproductive organs. In the thoracic cavity, you can find the organs of the cardiovascular system or the respiratory system. So collectively, major organs are located in these cavities. The ventral body cavity is subdivided into the thoracic and abdominal pelvic cavities. And then the thoracic cavity is divided even further into 2 pleural cavities. Pleura or pleuro means lungs, and pericardial, peri means around. Cardio, what does cardio mean? We've mentioned this already, right? It means heart. So the pericardial cavity surrounds the heart. The pericardial cavity is located in the thoracic cavity, and the thoracic cavity is located in the ventral body cavity. So there's cavities within cavities within cavities that really just isolate these organs, protect them, and keep them safe, but also allow them to move. Right here's the pleural cavity, in which there's one left pleural cavity and one right pleural cavity. Answer me this. What body plane is this person sectioned into to see this view? The abdominal pelvic cavity is also further divided. It's bound by the diaphragm superiorly, muscles of the abdominal wall anteriorly, here, right here's the diaphragm, the vertebral column posteriorly, there's your vertebrae, and bones and muscles of the pelvis inferiorly. It's also subdivided into more cavities. The abdominal cavity, which mostly holds urinary and digestive system organs, and the pelvic cavity, which has some digestive organs, but mostly reproductive organs. This red line in this figure designates everything that creates the abdominal pelvic cavities, the abdominal cavity really. Behind it is called a retroperitoneal area. Not every single organ of the digestive system or urinary and reproductive systems is located in the abdominal pelvic cavity. Some of them actually reside behind that cavity. It's called retroperitoneally. The kidneys and the pancreas are located behind that peritoneal lining. That lining is what creates the abdominal pelvic cavity. So that retroperitoneal lining, or the lining, called peritoneum, is red. Behind it, think retro is throwback or behind. Retroperitoneal area contains two organs. I think that's so cool that some organs are located in the cavity and some don't need the cavity or the membranes there to survive and be healthy. So this finishes our lecture for chapter 1. We're all finished. At this point, review these videos, study the chapter notes that you can find on our Canvas module as well, and then take the quiz. You should be able to click on the link for the quiz, and then once you hit the submit button, the quiz is timed, so you have 12 minutes to finish the quiz. That quiz will, once you are done, or once the 12 minutes is up, the quiz will automatically submit. So when you're finished, don't forget to hit the submit button. That submit button will then grade the quiz, and you can go to the grade book in Canvas and look at your grade for the quiz. Good luck, study hard. If you have any questions, email me, or like I said, we can start a Canvas discussion. Good luck.